This next video is going to teach us just how to deal algebraically with I. So the first things first is that when we have an I, we call this the complex number system. It's a combination of a real number and imaginary number, and you always want to write these with the real number first plus the imaginary or lateral number. So when you're adding and subtracting, it is literally just like making the I an X. So if I have negative 11 plus 4I plus 6 plus 8I, the plus isn't going to change anything in the second bracket because I'm really multiplying a plus 1 through. So I'm going to do negative 11 plus 6 is negative 5. And then 4I plus 8I is just 12 I's. And that's it. If you put a minus sign in between, don't forget that you have to distribute the negative. So you'd have 4 plus 5i minus 6 plus 3i. And then we can collect like terms. We've got 4 take away 6 is negative 2. And then 5i plus 3i would be plus 8i. So nothing new. The only difference being that if this was an x, you'd write it first. And since this is an I, you write it second. The next thing we're going to do is multiply with an I. And in order to multiply with an I, you need to learn a second rule. And that second rule is that anytime you have an I squared, it becomes negative 1. And if you're interested at all in why this is or kind of the history of I really do encourage you to watch the rest of that series of videos I showed. So the next video is on the history of I, and then they kind of go into more dealing with I if you're curious. But you can also just be like, hey, I is the square root of negative 1, and I squared is negative 1, and just be like, okay, cool. That's a rule that I'm going to remember. So if I'm going to distribute the 3i through this bracket, 3i times 6 is 18i. 3i times 4i is 12i squared. Anytime you have an I squared, you're going to replace it with a negative 1. So then to write this as a proper complex number, we're going to write minus 12 plus 18i. The thing that was imaginary became real. Crazy. Two more examples here. So this one's just a giant distribution. Well, it's not even that giant, just like a FOIL. So we're going to multiply the 1 through. So we get 1 plus 3i. 2i times 1 is another 2i, and then 2i times 3i gives us 6i squared. Again, you're going to replace that I squared with a negative 1. So we have 1 plus 5i, collecting like terms, plus 6 times negative 1. So I end up with 1 minus 6 is negative 5 plus 5i. All right, hopefully you got the swing of this. You're going to pause the video, give this one a go. And if you did, when you're squaring something, you're multiplying it by itself. So we end up with 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative 7 is negative 21i. Negative 7i times 3 is another negative 21i. And then negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49. I times I gives me that I squared. So then I've got 9. These are my like terms. Gives me negative 42i. And then I've got this plus 49 times negative 1, because again, we've got that I squared that we're going to replace with the negative 1. And then I end up with negative 40 minus 42i. And that's it. So that is all there is to it. So it's not really that complicated. There's just an extra step beyond simplifying by multiplying, which is that anytime an I squared appears, make sure that you replace it with negative 1.